Well, welcome to this very special Mentor Course session. Today we have the amazing, the incomparable Wendy Badger. She's one of the first inaugural members of the Mentor Core community, and she has been one of the people who has frequently tweeted about the different events that we've had going on here on our Wednesdays with Mentor Core. My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. I am a compliance, ethics, and corporate governance strategist. And I run the firm Lumen Worldwide Endeavors. About over a year ago now, Dan and I were talking, as we often do, and we decided that there needed to be more connectedness. There needed to be more mentoring, more inclusion in the communities of compliance, security, and risk. And so we said, look, what can we do about it? And so was born Mentor Core. So welcome to this community and welcome to the event today. Before we continue, why don't you introduce yourself, Dan?
Wait, I get to say hi?
You
That's
do.
excellent.
I'm going to open
Hello.
it for just a minute.
Oh, okay. Wait, I thought this was my whole hour to talk. No. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Ayala. Lisa Beth covered Mentor Core so well. And by day, I'm a security and privacy professional and leader, virtual CISO and virtual privacy officer for companies under the company Socratic. But what I also love to do just as much is helping people grow and helping people, especially across these fields, especially security, risk, privacy, compliance, ethics, governance, find each other and find ways to grow themselves as professionals in the field and as leaders. So it's a privilege to be part of this community, and it is as big a privilege, if not bigger, to welcome Wendy Badger. Wendy, welcome. We're so excited to have you here today. Although I will admit it's going to be tough not having you live tweeting this as we're having the discussion. I wonder if you will go back and live tweet yourself afterward.
Thanks for having me, Dan and Lisa Beth. I'm super proud and honored, humbled to be here. I told you guys to give me softball questions, and I just don't know that I can live tweet this. I can try, but it's going to be super distracting.
No.
Going back after the fact, I can't stand listening to myself talk. I can't imagine going back and listening to the recording of this to capture any moments.
Understandable.
Well, it's welcome. Good to have you here today, for sure. And before we get really into things, just tell us a little bit about you and your journey to get to where you are today. Like, how did Wendy Badger become Wendy Badger?
Well, I don't know that we have time for all that, but what I will tell you is, my background is as a lawyer. So as my law school classmates would tell you, we graduated from what was then William Mitchell College of Law at the turn of the century, as some might say. So I was part of the centennial class of 2000. So, and I knew in law school, I thought going into law school actually that I wanted to be a prosecuting criminal attorney. And I found out very quickly in my first couple of semesters that that was not the right path for me. And so, I was the first in my family to go to college, never mind get education beyond that. So as a first generation law school student, all I knew about the law was, what you see on courtroom TV. And so I found out very quickly that that I had a lot of other options. And so I wanted to pursue more of an alternative career. So once I got out of law school, I started my career working for an international trade association that was based in Minnesota. And I just happened to see the job posting at the Career Resources Center. And that was back in the day where you actually had to send a hard copy of your resume and cover letter to an actual real live person. So I stayed with that organization for about 5 years, and it was there that I had my first introduction really to the ethics and compliance space. So part of my role at that company was to help the member organizations comply with the law. And that's kind of where I found this love or passion for connecting the business side of things with the legal side of things. It wasn't just me saying, this is what the law says, go figure it out. I was there rolling up my sleeves, hands on, saying, this is what the law says. Now let's translate that into what does that mean operationally that we need to do or change within the organization. So that's kind of what pushed me into that path. So from there, I went in-house to an organization, and I wasn't there very long, but what I found there was they just didn't have any structure in place, and that's really what they needed. So in that organization, I oversaw the compliance program, human resources, the auditing function, as well as the training function. So it was kind of a lot
Wow.
crammed into one role. And once I got there, I just put structure and into place. And once they had the structure, it kind of became self-sustaining once everybody understood what the structure was and what the protocols were. And I thought, well, gosh, if I can do that for one company, I can do that for a bunch of companies. And that's where I then left that organization and moved into private practice. And when I was in private practice, I worked primarily I worked with small to mid-sized organizations, helping them set up their own compliance and ethics functions if they didn't have structure in place, helping them draft their policies and procedures and put, again, that structure into place. But I also did some more general corporate and transactional law there as well. And then an opportunity came to me through a recruiter who contacted me and said, hey, you look like you've got the right background in a specific niche industry, but they really needed some compliance structure and focus. So then I went back in-house with an organization that was a nonprofit organization, but they had multiple different subsidiaries. So there were 5 different subsidiaries, a foundation, a for-profit organization, and I oversaw the ethics and compliance functions for all of the whole enterprise. And then as that organization changed and morphed over time, they ultimately started a wind down because their line of business was ending. And when that started to happen in my team, which was at one point 41 people, not all dedicated to ethics and compliance, but when my team went from 41 people ultimately down to 9, I thought, they don't need me anymore. They don't need what I'm bringing here. They don't need someone to build or enhance their compliance program. They need someone to sustain it and help wind it up. And I realized that I was being a roadblock to the people who were on my team under me looking to move up. And since they could do their jobs 1 up and 2 down, I thought, they don't need me. And as an organization is going through reductions in force, to me, it looks really bad if the only people who are being let go are those who are on the front lines. Eventually you run out of people who are doing the real work. So I felt that my exiting that organization would give opportunities to other people and really then help to grow my career as well. I was in a pretty niche industry for a very long time. For the majority of my career was all in the same specific industry, though wrapped around ethics and compliance. And so then I left that organization by choice in December of 2019. And thought, I'm going to take a couple months off. I'm going to, relax over the holidays. And then really, I had kind of started a bit of a job search and some increased networking. And then I thought, I need some time off. I need to decompress after all of this. And so I thought, I'm really going to ramp up my job search after the holidays in 2020. Enter March of 2020,
Right.
and the entire world shuts down. So
Wait,
not
what
only
happened
did
in March of 2020?
I don't recall.
not only did I
It's been
conduct my
suppressed.
I've blocked it.
not only did I conduct my entire job search in a global pandemic, it definitely changed my focus and my entire strategy for my job search. So, when Amy Landry had her discussion about, her job search and all of the unique things that she did, like I was riveted, like, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I do that? And,
Yeah,
ultimately it worked
she has
out.
a good story too.
She really does. So shout out, hey, Amy. So anyway, then that brought actually Lisa Beth and I together as well. I had posted on LinkedIn that I was exiting my position and, looking forward to this next chapter, and I'm holding the pen that's writing that book. And so I was betting on myself and, looking forward to that. And to tie this a little bit more, I feel like I've talked about myself way too much already, but to tie this a little bit more into Mentor Core and why I think this group is so critical is, I mentioned I was in a very niche industry. And when I had reached out to some people in that industry and, posted on LinkedIn, I had one person in that industry reach out to me and say, hey, let's talk. Let's talk about your strategy. What are you looking for? How can I help? What can I do? And that individual, in fact, he said, send me your resume. And he was handing out my resume at trade shows that he was able to attend and sending it out to people who might have been looking for someone in the ethics and compliance space. And what was interesting is I really focused my networking on that niche industry and not the broader ethics and compliance community, which, I mentioned in one of my postings about this session that I would talk about what worked, but also what didn't work and where did I fail. And that's one of the places where I definitely failed, that I did not throughout my career focus on the broader ethics and compliance community. I really focused on a niche area. And so that's something that maybe if I could go back and do differently, or talk to people who are just either entering into their careers and looking to enter into this space, that would be one piece of advice that I would give them, is broaden that network. Even if you're like super passionate about healthcare, or you're really into fintech, or whatever, manufacturing, whatever the specific industry is that you're passionate about, if you're in ethics and compliance, there is a much broader community of people who all have lessons that we can learn from. And so really try and network and engage in that community rather than just niching yourself into a specific industry area.
Oh, I think that's really good. Niches are good until they're not.
Exactly.
And then when they're not, it's not for everybody in that niche.
For sure. So after, 13 and a half months or so, like I mentioned, my job search started before I left my organization. But from December of 2019 until I just started my brand new position in January of 2020, I now am in a global compliance council role where I oversee the global ethics and compliance program of an organization that so not only am I new to this role, but it's a newly created role. So they've never had an individual focus on ethics and compliance before. It was kind of scattered other places, all of that. So it's very interesting because all of my interviews were conducted virtually. I started remotely. In fact, I still have yet to set foot at headquarters on campus. Once I started getting to know people and to learn people and learn more about the business, I still don't have that in-person connection. I've not been able to visit our manufacturing sites or locations. So in terms of learning about the business, that has created some challenges over my first, very many days. So anyway, so I started in January, and that brings me here to Mentor Core, just over now 100 days into this newly created role in a new industry, at a new company where I'm learning new people, new culture, new business, like new everything, new technology, because all the technology is different as well from what I was used to in my previous positions.
Well,
It's a great backstory, and I think I'm really eager to dive into the 100 days learning. But I do want to call out something that was brought up in the chat while you were talking. One of the people that's watching made the comment, I know the feeling of being the last woman standing as our program wound down. Unfortunately, I was not told I would be eliminated, but had enough intuition to know that it would happen and prepared for that eventual layoff. I think that's a really wise point of be situationally aware enough to know that if you look to your left and you look to the right and you don't see that person, it might just be you.
There's always the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Or you can read between the lines, you can kind of see it coming. And so I had the very unique opportunity to essentially plan my own exit. I planned the strategy, I planned the timing down to the day. My last day in the office was the day before my birthday. So I was able to plan it down to that level of detail, and then into how I was going to plan into the job search. So if you're able to take control of that narrative, and when you see that writing on the wall, I prepared the entire plan. It took a while to get my former boss a while to buy into it, but once I kind of explained the reasoning behind it, I think his wheels started turning too. And it started out as a conversation like, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? And I just kind of flipped that back and I said, where do you see me in 18 months? Is it really, like, really, is it
Right.
here? Because look what's going on within the organization. And I think that's what really got him to kind of start thinking. And so, like I said, it was a very unique opportunity, but by me seeing that writing on the wall, being strategic about it and being able to control the narrative and plan the exit and strategy, it showed the thoughtfulness. It helped the transition for my team. All of that really kind of, the pieces just all kind of fell into place, and it helped me know I was making the right decision.
Yeah. So one of the things you brought up is that, if you could have done it again, you would have networked earlier with the broader industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one of the things that you didn't bring up is something that we were talking about actually on a separate channel about the importance of thank yous and acknowledging when people, meet up with you. I have to, does this look familiar?
It does.
So one of the things that became very valuable for me about you, Wendy, was we went before pandemic and everything, and we went and we had a coffee because I had seen that you were, thinking about changing life up a little bit and that you were planning your exit. But I still have the thank you note that you wrote after that coffee. And I think it's really important to identify, right? Thank you notes actually can go a long way in making sure that you stay sticky with the people that you're meeting and that you want to connect with, both within and outside your industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge too. As your network expands, as you grow and continue and make those connections, like how do you continue to stay connected on a, that, because and this is coming from someone who's an introvert. So, networking for me is really hard, right? Like when I go to conferences, I'm not the one who's going to just jump into a conversation. I'm the one who's sitting at a table, probably by myself. I get to the session early so I can get like my seating right, like so I can see everyone. But I'm also the one who is going to want to figure out what works for me. So I'll look at the attendee list in advance and see, is Dan or Lisa Beth going to be there? Or, is Mary Shirley going to be there? Because if she is, I'm going to hunt her down and find her to create an in-person connection, right? Like I'm going to
Right.
find that. I'm going to volunteer to introduce the speakers because that gives me a role and something to do with myself rather than just sit there awkwardly. So those are, you kind of figure out your own way, and throughout the pandemic, that's part of what I did. And I know we don't want to talk about like job search stuff. We want to get into once you actually get the job.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that I had to adjust and put myself out of my comfort zone to figure out how is this going to work. So I attended like a ton of virtual conferences, but for me then it was better. I was able to engage in the chat function and created some really great connections there as well. So that aside, but it's lovely to see that you still have that thank you note. It doesn't have to be a handwritten one, right? Like that's, for me,
It doesn't.
No, it
that's
doesn't.
part of how I was raised, right? Like you don't, when you get a gift, you don't wear it, eat it, return it, use it, eat it, whatever, listen to it until you send that thank you note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Period. And it could be an email, it could be a shout out on LinkedIn, but you're acknowledging, like Lisa Beth gave me the gift of her time and her expertise, and our conversations were so great. Like it got me thinking, do I want to start my own business? Like what do I really want what do I want to do? And so those pieces that really got me thinking drove me to, no, I feel like I do want to go back in-house. I do. For me, I need the security blanket of a corporate job, if you will, that has benefits and that has,
Mm-hmm.
consistent income where I don't have to worry as much about working on the business versus working in the business.
Oh, that's the conversation we definitely had.
We definitely had that. And I recognize that part of what I did not like about private practice, even though I spent 5 years there, was going out and getting clients.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did that in a very different way than the partners did at that law firm. And so they didn't recognize that my way of doing things was also valid. I didn't want to go out to lunches. I didn't want to go golfing. To this day, I have yet to ever pick up anything other than a mini golf club. So I didn't want to do any of that. But what was effective for me was giving presentations, was going to, again, back to the industry issue, going to industry events and setting myself up as the expert. I'm here, I have something to say, I know about this stuff, and then have people come to me to say, hey, I saw your presentation on X, Y, or Z. Can you help me with this? That was effective for me. And so how does that translate into, what am I doing now? And I tried to take that mindset into my new job, where as an introvert, I call myself actually a situational extrovert, because I have to be able to flip that switch and turn it on when the moment calls for it. And when you start a new job, the moment is kind of calling for it. Even though part of what you want to do, and part of what I want to do for like the first year, is just be a sponge and just sit and listen and learn, because it takes a long time to learn a new company, even if you're in the same industry, different company, different people, like who are the go-tos. Mm-hmm. So for me, I felt really very lucky that my organization that I joined in my first couple of weeks was really setting me up for success. When I logged in that first day, it was kind of anticlimactic, after all of this drama with the job search, and then the virtual interviews, where my first interview with the woman who's now my boss, my video didn't work. So we sat there and talked for 2 hours where I could see and hear her, but she could only hear me. So it wasn't until actually we had a quick conversation about 2.5 weeks before I started, where she actually ever saw my face. So kind of hired sight unseen. In my follow-up interviews, though, I figured that out, was able to get it to work. But anyway, so my first day was kind of anticlimactic. Like, I'd gotten all of this equipment shipped to my house. I got this computer and this monitor and like all this stuff. And they had sent information to my personal email about here's what you do to log in and, all that stuff. And so I log in on that first day and like, I'm here. Like, now what? There's nobody greeting you at the door. But I'm like, this is day 1, like minute 2. How do I have 45 emails already? But most of them were actually meetings that they had set up for me to meet people. What I found challenging about that was, it was like Wendy one-on-one with David. I don't know who David is. I don't know what David's last name is. I don't know if David's in my department. I don't know anything about him. So I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't feel like I was able to come to that meeting prepared. So I made quick notes to myself, because I have in the budget room to hire an individual, a full-time employee. So I'm making notes, because I didn't know how long this pandemic was going to last. I don't know if the person I hire when we're ready, is that person going to start remotely? So I wanted to be prepared that when I set up those one-on-one meetings for that individual, they're going to know that they are meeting with David Myers, who's in the product regulatory team, and that is within the legal umbrella. And, just so they can be set up for success in terms of what questions to ask and who to go to for what.
So if you were to do it differently, would you have included like a bio for both people then, just so that they both know what they're getting into?
I don't know that it would have been necessarily a bio, but some background, because I didn't know what they knew about me either. Mm-hmm. If like, oh, she's the new kid on the block, but I didn't know if they knew my title, if it had been announced that someone was filling this role, because it could have been like, oh, this is Wendy, she's Michael's replacement. Well, that wasn't the case, because this is a newly created role. So I didn't know what background those folks had on me. So I feel like there was a little bit of wasted time in there, where we're just like kind of figuring each other out, like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why I'm meeting with you and what your background is. And then we could kind of get into it a little bit more. So I feel like those meetings could have maybe been a little bit more productive sooner with some additional background information.
It's good for every hiring manager to know.
See, what's funny,
whether that's virtual or not, right?
Right.
What's funny is, I see that as an opportunity to not have somebody walk in having somebody else's conception of what I'm there to do. It's a clean slate. It's a chance for me to set the narrative. And if I'm new in a role, I set the narrative for the discussion. But like I said, your mileage may vary, and it depends on the organization and on, how big an E you are or want to be in that situation.
Says the super extrovert, right?
But Dan, you make a great point, because, you know, in a newly created role, they don't like they're when you're stepping into someone else's shoes, like, you're going to do things differently than that person, but there is some measure of expectation, whether it's, well, that's not how Michael used to do it or whatever, you know. So you're walking into this with, you know, how am I going to approach this? Who do I want to be in this new role? And I gave that a lot of thought, like, coming into this, right? Like, especially those first few weeks, where once I accepted all of those calendar appointments, I had very few emails, right? It was like, you need to go through this benefits training and here's some IT information. And like, that was
hopefully a good information security training.
Sure. So so once you get through that, then, you know, once people start to know you're there and they start to email you and give you information, I started to think about, what expectations am I setting here? If I'm responding immediately, like instantaneously, have I just set an expectation with that person that that's what it's going to be like going forward? Once I'm more settled into the role and once I get busier, that might not be the case. So I didn't want to set that expectation out of the gates. And one thing that I did in my last role that I'm trying to not repeat in this role is, I want to be involved early in different situations, right? Like, the earlier we can bring an ethics and compliance mindset to different projects, the less rework we're going to have to do. And it's like, oh, well, we didn't quite do that right, or we need to rethink how we're doing that because it doesn't comply with X, Y, or Z. So the earlier you can get in up front, the better. The mistake I made in my last role is that folks said, oh no, we need Wendy for that. We need Wendy for this, which is kind of great because they're getting it. But as I built out the function and the team, they didn't need Wendy. They needed an ethics and compliance mindset. They needed someone who was able to answer those questions. That didn't mean it was always going to be Wendy. So now I'm trying to change, to your point, and I'm trying to control and change that narrative to say, have we considered the ethics and compliance perspective? Just because we can do this doesn't mean we should do this. And what does that mean, you know, kind of more broadly, but don't attach my name to it, attach a compliance perspective to it. Because compliance is everyone's job. So it may not even be, as my team gets built out, it might not even be someone from my team. It could be a compliance champion or, you know, someone who is an ally in that space that can handle that. So it doesn't need to be me. So I'm trying to not so much attach my name to it as opposed to that from
The
kind
royal,
of just
yeah. I have a quick question for you as you're walking into some of these discussions. Just talk to me a little bit about the balance between getting the questions you have answered versus getting the thing that the person you're meeting with first needs to tell you or wants to tell you.
So there's the challenge between kind of what I think the ethics and compliance program should look like and all the potential that I see in it versus what they want out of it. And so in my first initial meetings, I tried to do more listening than talking. You know, it would be a quick introduction of myself and here's kind of my role as I see it right now. But, you know, I'm playing the new kid on the block card, right? And yes, that is an intentional reference to the boy band. Take from that what you will.
But
so
you
I'm the
don't
new
know
kid on the
Janie's
block.
crying from Van Halen.
I'm not, you know, whatever. New Kids on the Block are touring currently. So it could be a current love, not necessarily from long ago. Anyway, I digress. So I tried to strike this balance of I really needed to be a sponge because I don't want to make this about me, but I see potential in the program. And that's part of why I took the job to begin with. But I needed to be a sponge because I'm not only learning the business, I'm learning what was in place before, what worked before, and I'm picking up these things just by things that people are saying from where their interests are. Like, well, how are you going to change X, Y, or Z? And there's this part of me that was like, for the first year, I don't want to change anything, right? Like, I just want to see how it works. But there are pieces that maybe needed to change or something. So I really tried to do more listening than talking, being a sponge, absorbing that. All the while, I was taking copious notes about what was person, what resonated with them, what questions were they asking me, and how could I maybe leverage them in the future as an ally. As I'm talking to the woman who heads our research and development function, she's very concerned about privacy. And I'm like, bingo, there's my ally right there. Didn't get into it in that first meeting, but I'm taking copious notes about all of that stuff. So I tried to be responsive to the questions, not reactive to the ones that I got, but again, do more listening. So I did come in with tons of questions, and some were just, tell me what your experience has been with this in the past. But then I found too that once we kind of got past the initial intros and I understood why I was meeting with these people, natural curiosity just took over, on both sides of that conversation. And so as I was taking all of my notes that I talked about, one of the things that I did that was pretty time consuming, but I found to be really valuable, is about 3 or 4 weeks after I started, I went back to all of those notes that I took and I rewrote them by hand. I didn't type them because for me, the way there's all kinds of different learners, but the way I learn better is by absorbing it and physically writing it down. Mm-hmm. And when I write in a meeting like that, I'm writing super quick, and often it's hard to understand what I wrote if I don't go back and revisit it because I'm writing so quickly, it gets really messy. Right. So I went back and rewrote those notes, and I color coded them for different areas and different departments. And then pieces of the puzzle started to fit together better. And I was like, oh, okay, so now I see how this connects with that, and started to create the picture for myself. And maybe this person, the folks who run our ESG area, our sustainability function, all of that, there's so much overlap with some of the stuff that I am doing that I just latched onto them. And so then I started asking more questions, and I ended every conversation with, who else do you think I should be meeting with? Who else would be good for me to meet, in these initial few days? Or who would you go to for something like this or that? If I wanted to, I don't know, brand the ethics and compliance program, who would be a good person to talk to about that? Just as an idea,
Example.
Right. And one of the things I want to do, and then you also are balancing what you want to do with what needs to be done. What are you really good at? All of these, what I want to do is rewrite the code of conduct, which isn't called the code of conduct, but that's what the training is called. So there's a disconnect there, right? So that's what I really want to do, but it's not a priority right now. That is not top of the list. So I've kind of had to put that on the back burner for now. But knowing that project is coming, I'm figuring out who are going to be the allies for that. Who can I recruit? Because it's not going to be me writing the document in a vacuum. I want it to be reflective of all of these different things. So I was really trying to be mindful of all of that as I was rewriting that. And then that gave me more questions. So then I asked for, just another 15 to 30 minutes on people's calendars to say, hey, I had some follow-up questions on this. Can you spare a few minutes? And because I'm also missing being in a fully remote position, at least for now, I'm missing those hallway conversations, right. the pop-in. And so I'm trying to translate all of this into how does this work virtually? If I'm popping an instant message over to someone to say, hey, do you have a minute? It's like, my little code with Lisa Beth, I'm having a minute. Do you have a minute? Or I'm having a moment. Do you got a minute? When I text her that, she knows that I'm having a confidence of crisis or a crisis confidence. Anyway, so I'm trying to be mindful about that, because that's going to continue to build rapport and relationships, because especially I think in an ethics and compliance role, if you don't have that trust and that rapport in those relationships, it's not going to be effective or efficient. So I'm really trying to build that trust. And what's been interesting is there's a couple of people who I've met in our upper levels of leadership where my first interaction with them was, hey, sorry, I know we're just meeting right now for the very first time. Nice to meet you. By the way, I need to conduct an investigation in your area, because we got a report through the ethics line. And that happened twice in 2 different international locations in my first 100 days.
It's a good way to, do bond by trial by fire.
Right. But they had a certain expectation for how this thing was going to go. And I maybe handle it a little bit differently than they're used to.
Mhm.
But in that challenge, so part of it was just the interaction and my thanking them for their support and their participation and their engagement throughout the process, because part of the conversation is who gets to know what and when, and why can't I know more, and all of that. So now I'm being very mindful once we close those out to go back to those people and say, hey, I really appreciate your support and participation. I know this was probably different than you're used to, and likely we would have had a lot of these conversations earlier, but circumstances warranted that we needed to do a thorough and fair and timely investigation. So we couldn't really, it was kind of backwards from that perspective, but it gives me an opportunity now to go back and say, okay, what did we learn from this? What did you like? What did you not like? What was similar to what you've done before? How could we do it better going forward? And if it's something that I'm not comfortable with from, an investigation standpoint, I can articulate why that is. Because I don't like to be told what to do. I want to understand the why behind what I'm being asked to do, and kind of have that. And if I'm not able to articulate that, well, then it's just the Wendy way, and that's not necessarily needs to be the way, right? It could be just that somebody else would do it differently, and different doesn't mean wrong. It just means it's different. So having those conversations, I'm setting up those meetings now to have those conversations, continue to build that rapport. So that's been interesting, where some people I've been able to meet up front and have those conversations, whereas others it's completely flipped around. But so far everyone's been very receptive to it. And there's been, I think, a lot of appreciation and understanding for, okay, now I get why we maybe needed someone in this type of a role and what we were missing before. So that has been really great to have that kind of support. And that's, I consider that somewhat of a luxury, even though I would like to make that kind of just commonplace.
Wendy, are you in a new vertical in this job? A new field that you hadn't been in prior?
A different industry. Yeah.
Different industry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So previously I was in financial services, and now I'm in more manufacturing and distribution.
Okay. So then the question that came in, you're hopefully you're able to answer quite easily from your own experiences. This person writes in, I'm moving to another company to head their global A, B, and C and sanctions function. My question is, as this is my fourth industry, insurance, and a new one for the person who wrote this, and a first time as a global head, appreciate your input in how to get up to speed and apply known expertise in an unfamiliar territory within those first 100 days.
That's a great question. And that's something that I continue to struggle with. And I'll tell you a couple things one thing that did not work for me, and a couple things that are working, because I find it's all sometimes helpful to learn from other people's mistakes. So one thing, and that I was super psyched about, and I struggled with this before I started, is how much pre-work do I do before I actually start my job? Because that's compensable work, right? Like I should get paid for some of this. And so I really struggled with some of that. So I kind of, here comes a legal term, I bifurcated it, right? I thought, okay, what would help me regardless of whether or not I have a job, and what would help me because of this job specifically, or this industry. So that's kind of what my separation was before I even started my role. And so before I started, I did a ton of reading. I read a bunch of books. Like, for example, I read Radical Candor by Kim Ball-Scott. I read Dare to Lead by Brene. Well, I basically read everything Brene Brown's ever written, but I read Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And I read the first 90 Days by,
good book,
Michael Watkins. That's probably wrong. Don't quote me on that. But the name of the book is the first 90 days. And it was very interesting how very unhelpful some of that was. For example, I'll just use the first 90. That book focused very much on, you need to get out there and you need to meet the people and you need to go to the locations and figure out why you're needed. And many of the examples in that book were people who had moved up within an organization or moved departments within an organization, not that they were starting in a new industry or in a new company. And none of those examples are in a global pandemic where you're starting virtually or remotely, and you can't go to, like, for example, the manufacturing site to see and feel and touch and hear what goes on. So that was one of the challenges that I had. So reading those books were actually not terribly helpful for me. But I did scour the organization's website. I read their code of conduct, what I call the code of conduct, multiple times. I read the supplier codes of conduct that are all publicly available on the website. So you can consume a lot and learn quite a bit about the organization through that. And if you just Google it and see, what stories are out there, both good or bad, you can kind of get some general information from that perspective. What products do they have? I think this is potentially applicable in the insurance world too. Like, what types of insurance are they selling? Is it, is it medical? Is it health? Is it life? Is it business insurance? Like, is it cyber insurance? Like, there's so many different facets to that too. So learn what you can from that perspective, and then asking tons of questions. Of people looking to see what other information is available was really helpful to me. I will say this, I'm just over 100 days in now. I don't feel like I know nearly as much as I should. And part of that is because I had in my head where I should be at this point. And that's not where I am. And part of that is just due to the challenges of working in a remote field and trying to get people to be available and accessible virtually is much different than doing it in person when you can just pop in and knock on their door. So that has been a bit of a challenge. But so I will say this, once I started, my natural curiosity took over. And I think the person who's starting in their new role will find that too. Your natural curiosity takes over. And you start to be that sponge. And the more people generally like to talk about stuff that they do and what they do and how they see their importance within an organization. And so just keep picking up on that is what I have found to be helpful for me. The other thing that I was actually really surprised about, and maybe this says more about my background than I maybe want to disclose, but I have also found within this new organization that people are very deferential to expertise as opposed to authority. And that's kind of flipped on its head from what I have been used to in terms of people deferring to authority rather than expertise. So when I come into the organization, they hired me for a reason. They saw something in my background that resonated with them, whether it's because I've built a program before or whatever the case may be, or I just said the right thing in an interview. I don't know. That'd be a good thing to find out though, I suppose. But they hired me for a reason, and they're now recognizing that. So for example, in a meeting, I was with my boss and somebody asked a question related to the ethics and compliance space. I don't even remember what the question was right now, but so my boss said, well, I'm going to give you kind of a high level answer to that from the senior management team, like from the executive level team. She said, but I defer to Wendy on that because that's her space. That to me was huge because that set me up as the expert and kind of brought that in, like, no, you don't have to come to me for that question. That's why she's here. We have her for that. So that deference to expertise made a huge difference. So now people know, and I'm sure my boss probably was the person they went to before I started, but her willingness to say, nope, that's not my area. She may oversee that area. I may report to her, but go to the subject matter expert. So I think that you'll find in a healthier environment, that is what you should see and will see. And you can have that conversation with your boss about that. I've had tons of conversations with my boss about, how am I doing in the first 30, 60, 90 days? I had those check-in points, not because they were pre-established, but because I asked for them. Like, I wanted to add value. I wanted to make sure, and there are many days, don't get me wrong, there are many days I feel like I am in over my head. Like, what did I get myself into? What am I doing here? Going from, running a domestic program to a global program is a leap. But they have confidence in me, right? And so trying to find that confidence in yourself. So I wanted those touch points with my boss to say, what am I doing well? What could I be doing better? What am I not doing that I should be doing? and having those touch points and her telling me, no, you're doing great. For me is really helpful. Not that I need the constant reaffirmation and the pats on the head and all of that, but it is nice to know, especially when you're in a new position, a newly created position, in a new job, in a new company, in a new industry. So I think that for me has been really great. Another thing that's been really great is so in my first, I won't even go my first 100 days. In my first 6 weeks at the company, here's what happened. So I had all of these meetings set up. I had two, not one, but two international ethics investigations that I needed to launch. I had to sort of digest a ton of information because on week 6, I was presenting to the audit committee of the board of directors, and I had to present to them, here's my plan for 2021, and here's what I think we're going to focus on. And I had to walk that plan back because initially it was way too much and way too big for me as one person to do. Like, I needed to lay some more foundation for the program. So part of that is, hey, I'm going to do an ethics and compliance awareness campaign. Like, what does this mean for the organization? Who am I? And more importantly, what does this mean for you? What's in it for me? Which is really, at the end of the day, what everyone wants to know. So all of that within my first 6 weeks. And part of that feels like, when you're doing an awareness campaign, part of it feels like you're not really doing anything because there's not something tangible that you can say, look at this podcast I created, or look at this blog that I did, or look at all these policies that I updated and put into a new format and all of that. But you're laying the foundation for what's to come. If the program doesn't have a solid foundation to begin with, it's just going to be a house of cards that falls apart. And I could mix a bunch of different metaphors here in terms of building a foundation for a house, and you don't really see the structure of the house build up for a while. Or there's a gardening analogy that you could use, so there's kind of all of that. And that's where I feel like I'm focusing right now, is building and laying that foundation, which involves building the rapport and the trust with other members of the organization. So I think you can get there, and I think your organization will help you. And this is what I think I've learned, and wish I would have applied in previous roles, is don't be afraid to ask for what you need, not just what you want. Because if I needed that, my boss to do that in a meeting, to say, no, go to Wendy for this, I'm confident she would have, so we can have some of those conversations about what do I need. And one of those conversations that we recently had was permission to fail. Like, I kind of felt like I need to be successful in this role. Everything that I roll out needs to be successful. And it doesn't, so kind of back to a research and development analogy, for every 400 ideas they have, maybe one makes it to market.
Right.
And so I'm trying to take that approach with this too, that not everything that I do is going to be successful, especially on a global scale, because what works in one region or location or department might not work in another. And that's part of tailoring the program. But it's also a learning thing it's a learning curve for me as I learn the organization and learn, the different ways the organization has been integrated through various acquisitions, which is also very, very different. Right. So feeling like I have that permission to fail is really important to me. And I have that now, even in presenting to our executive leadership team, which I did just like 2 weeks ago, and brought to them my plan and some of the data that we have on the metrics and the benchmarks within the department and within ethics and compliance. That conversation was really engaging, and they were asking really great questions. And in fact, the CEO now has follow-up questions, and it came from him. He said, we should really brand this program. And I was like, mic drop, I'm out. I have just won for the year. Like, if I do nothing else, I have that level of buy-in, which is to me amazing. So I feel like those pieces are setting me up for success, even if some of the initiatives that I attempt are ultimately not successful. But as long as we learn from them, because I don't think you lose. You either win or you learn. So what did we learn from it, and how can we do better next time? Who said it? Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. And that's part of my goal.
So we've questions that have come in, and one of them is like, All right, let's crystal ball it here for just a moment. Do you have any thoughts on returning to the office and how that'll influence starting or restarting in the 100 days, especially if you join the organization virtually? Is it like first 100 days part 2?
I'm not even kidding. I have stress dreams about this.
Do they involve
No
showing up
joke.
in pajamas at work? Like, because that kind of stresses me out.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. I'm currently wearing sweatpants and slippers, so that alone is going to be an adjustment, right? But no, I do worry about that, because I've met so many people virtually. Like, I know who my office neighbors are, who's on either side of me, but I don't know, like, would they welcome the pop in? Like, there's so much of that, like, office courtesies and just kind of the unwritten rules of the organization that I still don't know. So I do think that there's going to be a learning curve with that. I could actually be walking right next to someone in an office hallway and not even realize that I've met them before. I have no idea how tall these people are. Like, I've seen them from here to here, right? Like, I have no idea. So I do think that there's going to be another piece of that. But I think it will be easier because I've laid some foundation with most of them already. Like, I have something to build on, so it won't be like a cold call where, we're starting from square one all over again. The other thing that I've done, and this, I don't know if this is unique to my organization or not. The other thing that I've done is I've tried to balance volunteering for different events and different things. So I live not far from the Minnesota Zoo, and part of what my company does, or what they do, is we manufacture and distribute cleaning machines, like floor sweepers and scrubbers. And so well, I shouldn't say every year, since we didn't do it last year, given, global pandemic and all. But we go
when
to
allowed.
when allowed, we went to, like, the Arboretum, and we went to the Minnesota Zoo, and we cleaned and swept and scrubbed all of their walkways, their parking lots, their entryways, with all of our equipment. It was part of our, that we were giving back to the community, part of our stewardship, all of that within the organization. But so I volunteered for one of those events, because then I was able to meet some people in person. And because I'm not able to get into our manufacturing facility right now to see how these machines are built, I have hands-on experience. I should have sent you guys so we could display this, but I have a photo of me now sitting on one of our ride-on scrubbers, cleaning the entryway to the Minnesota Zoo.
Nice.
So I was able to kind of translate that, and then meet some people in person, none of whom will recognize me when we are back in the office, because we were all wearing masks, and and it was really cold that day too. So, like, most of us were in, like, stocking caps and whatever. So I volunteered for that. The other thing that I've done is I've tried to find opportunities to volunteer in other areas. We are working right now on a global human rights policy, and there's a lot of overlap with my area, with a lot of the pieces that will be incorporated into that. But I also didn't want to overextend myself. So I said, hey, if you want me to take a look at that, I'm happy to offer some suggestions. Well, that then turned into me now being on the committee that writes that policy. I don't own it, but I'm able to, and I've been able to create relationships with more people in the organization who I might not otherwise have had interaction or access to. But I really had to balance that with, am I overcommitting myself? Do I know enough about the organization yet to be able to say, we as an organization can make this commitment, we can make this public facing statement? So it's been a really good learning opportunity from that perspective. And then we wanted a review council. So we're not just drafting this document in a vacuum. We wanted other areas, we wanted global supply chain to look at it. We wanted investor relations to look at it. So I volunteered to reach out to some of those people to say, hey, would you be willing to be on this review council? Because then that allowed me to introduce myself. Here's who I am. Here's my area. Here's how I'm involved in that. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't as much pressure, like, what are you doing with the ethics and compliance program? It was a nice, very much low pressure situation. And the worst they could say is, no, I don't have time for that. And I'd be like, okay, great. Well, thanks for your time. And can you recommend somebody else who might be able to bring this perspective. So that was a really nice piece that I was able to do too. But I expect all those relationships will need to be rebuilt in person.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You found something even more awkward than running into somebody out of context at the grocery store. It's that I've been working with you for a year and now we'll meet each other for the first time situation.
Mm-hmm.
So quick fun tidbit on that. So again, maybe too much information here too, but in the other version of my life, I'm a certified jazzercise instructor. And so that's how I often feel when I see the students or customers who come to my class at the grocery store. If I'm not wearing my workout clothes and full of sweat and just like disgusting, often they don't recognize me. And I'm kind of okay with that.
Well, on that note, believe it or not, we have pretty much gone to the end of the hour, and we have to get our signature question in, which is, Wendy, what is the best advice that you've ever gotten from a mentor?
Well, let me say two things real quickly first. So if there are questions we did not get to in the chat, I'm happy to answer those offline or connect with people individually and talk more about this at any time. So please feel free to either connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out or email me, whatever. However, I'd like to really address those questions if that's where people have concerns. But more to the question, throughout my career, I have not really had formal mentors. Some have been very informal, or what, Lisa Beth, I think you've called them anti-mentors, where I've learned what to do by seeing what not to do, or seeing how someone handled a situation and thinking, good, I would never treat someone that way, or just knowing that I would do the exact opposite of that. That's really been, like, I've not had mentors. And I think that maybe has been a bit to some detriment in my career. That's not to say I haven't learned from people, though. It's only recently that I've started to build some of that. And that's part of why it's so important to me, Mary Shirley, to send that elevator back down, right? And to create that. That's her book, by the way. Plug, I don't get paid for that. So I'm going to take you way, way back to my parents to answer this question and what's the best advice I've received from a mentor. And that is something that my parents have taught me and continue to teach me every day. And that is that they have always told me, leave it better than you found it. So that's typically my goal in whatever situation I'm in, whether it's a new job, if it's a relationship, if it's just some passing interaction, it's leave it better than you found it.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And we're so happy that you were able to be with us today. I know that there was a ton of engagement. There, I'm sure, are a lot of questions. I feel like this could be like a part two.
Well, we should probably say what the echo means, because we kind of promote like, hey, how do you create an echo within your organization and how do you make it resonate? So here really quickly is that acronym. Creating the echo: engage early, collaboratively, helpfully, and either often or ongoing. You can pick which works best for you, but to create that echo and have it resonate within your organization for them to remember to engage ethics and compliance or whatever your area is. It doesn't have to limit it to that. That's how you create that echo and have people reflect that back to you.
And I think that's going to be a fantastic infographic to remind us of this wonderful session. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, everybody, for dialing in today. Feel free to join us next week when we have another Mentor Core session with the Chief Information Security Officer of the NFL. I'm
super glad I went before that, not after.
You were fantastic. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day. Bye.